Hello, and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm José.
And today we're talking about No Time to Die, Daniel Craig's fifth and final James Bond movie. Spoilers will be coming up. And this is a film that can be spoiled. And I want to start maybe with something that we were remarking upon in the car on the way back from the cinema, which is that I think one of the reasons this can be spoiled so intensely is that I don't think James Bond has been this serialised before. That's I've actually not seen all the films. I've seen very few of them. But my impression has always been, there's a pool of characters that they dip into. We were saying, there's Felix Leiter, there's Vesper Lynd, things like that. But these last 5 films, the Craig films, have actually been reasonably increasingly serialised, in fact. The development of the kind of understanding of Blofeld's plot and figuring out who he is and that kind of thing. The Léa Seydoux character comes into it, and her story really carries on from the last film, which she develops a relationship with Bond.
I mean, I would go even a bit further and say that, the Bond elements have been changed so much that it really doesn't feel like a Bond film to me at all.
Okay.
Right? So, in spite of Q and in spite of M, and in spite of the secretary, in spite of the gadgets, right? Those are the things that you get from series to series. There's a sense in which they've changed it so much that it doesn't feel like a Bond film for me.
What feels like a Bond film for you? And do you think it's something that this film lacks and could use? And what is it that you think makes it a Bond film or doesn't make it a Bond film?
Well, I mean, Bond films had very specific structures, right? There was always the sexy kind of preamble, where there's an attempt to kill Bond, and then there is the spectacular triumphant getaway. There's a little bit of that, except it's not triumphant and joyful, and and then at the end it was always the jokey addendum, kind of Roger Moore with the Bond girl in a raft somewhere in a tropical place drinking a martini or champagne or something, right? The
classic one was Pierce Brosnan with Christmas Jones, which was the Denise Richards character, I think, and he's fucking her. And the joke is, I thought Christmas only came once a year.
Yes.
And that's when people in 1997 were going, fucking hell, this has really run its course.
I mean, you can understand why there have been changes made, but actually, I think a question is, when you make so many changes, does it remain a Bond film or does it become something else? And actually, I think there's a sense in which, to me, this is something else, right? There were moments where I thought were mawkish. The scene at the end where the camera gets from person to person to person to person, in this kind of triumphalist mourning of Daniel Craig's Bond, which I thought, fucking give me a break. The idea of Bond having a child and a family, give me a break. This idea of self-sacrifice or whatever. Bond was always cool because you always felt like these things kind of didn't much matter to him, right?
This was definitely something that I was thinking about, because the Bond I'm really familiar with before Craig is Pierce Brosnan. I don't think I've seen a single one of the other films all the way through, but Brosnan's I have, and he's the one I grew up with in the 90s. And I always really liked him. And in fact, you were remarking again in the car, you feel he's a little bit underrated. You were saying.
I do, yeah.
And the thing about him, certainly, and probably the rest of the Bonds, is that their Bonds don't really take things very seriously. The thing about Daniel Craig's Bond that I think is a hallmark of his version of the character is that he can be outraged, and he regularly is. He's outraged with the way that the establishment is working, things they fuck up and things like that. You can't imagine Pierce Brosnan's Bond reacting to kind of institutional fuck-ups the way that Craig's does. Yeah. He would laugh it off.
Well, and Sean Connery's Bond, which is the one that I love the most, right? You get the sense that it comes from another generation. It's a generation that has lived through the war. Lots of shit happens, right? And, the whole idea is to kind of maintain your cool, to tread lightly over thin ice.
Keep calm and carry on.
Yeah, a little bit of that, but also, there's authority and you pretend that you give lip service to it, but then you do what you need to do, right? So there's a whole kind of series of attitudes which, are obviously from the last century, and maybe it's time to change, or, I'm not saying that kind of, that no changes need to be made, But I like Sean Connery's Bond. I love the colors. It was always like bright and poppy and azure blues and reds that were in your face. It was like a kind of a feel-good look. Yeah. It also had a little bit of a travel log about it, right?
Sure, yeah.
You went to the Bahamas, you went to this, but it was all like cool, sexy places that the majority of an audience would never be able to afford to walk through. All of those elements are not here, right? Like, so you go into the hotel in Cuba, right? But it's not there in its own right as an eye-catching place to want to be in, right?
Sure.
It's dark. It's everything about this film. I hated the photography of it because again, it was like so grey and dark, and I
don't think that was true.
Oh, I thought it was so grey. I thought everything tended towards the metallic, right? Even those scenes in Havana, right, or in, I think it was Santiago actually, it wasn't in Havana. Yeah. But like Cuba is a tropical country. You could have made all of that appealing and still brought darkness and tension and danger into it. But even bits that were meant to be tropical were tinged with grey for me. Even the shots of London, they're all kind of dark,
that is how
grey.
London always looks in these things. I mean, that's the thing. Like, London is the boring place, so you have to go back to report in, and then you go back out to the middle of the Cuba and where. But I think, I think you might have a point with the colour palette choices, but I really thought the look of the film was appealing. I really liked the shot selections. I think it's a film that's been very carefully constructed visually.
At the beginning of the film, when I saw, I thought, oh my God, who's this filmmaker? Right? Because I hadn't registered who made it. Because, there were moments with the mask. There was the moment where the girl went running through the ice. That I thought were like, very beautiful.
There's that use of the long lens on that bridge, which looks. Remember the snowman had a bridge. It may even be the same bridge. It looks just as incredible in that long.
But actually, you remind me now, because those scenes in Italy, where at the beginning of the film with Léa Seydoux, it's tinged with grey, right? Like, I mean, it's Italy. The sky should be like super blue. The mountains, the buildings will all have a particular like terracotta color leaning to white. This was like greyish.
Nothing like that occurred to me.
Okay.
Put it that way. I mean, for me, it looked beautiful, and it didn't look like it was doing anything of that nature to me. Nothing jumped out at me like that. But you may have a point. I don't know. And actually, I was really glad as well that because you look at a couple of the more recent previous Bonds, and I think they used the team from the Bourne films, and so they really kind of, I think Bourne really changed things, and to coin a phrase, shook things up, because that's what everything started to do after that in action. Really shook the cameras up, and this doesn't have that. It settles it down. It finds the shot that it. Those films and that look is all about snatching a shot, and this is about preparing a shot.
Sure,
which I really like. And actually, I think the action's some of the best I've seen in Bond.
The action was good. I feel very ambivalent. I like the film, but I didn't like it for what I like Bond for. I thought it could have just been any kind of action film, really. It changes so much of what Bond is about as to be something else. Now, that might be not a bad thing. But I thought it was kind of, worth stating, even though the film tries to weave the whole of the Bond legacy into it, from snatches of song, bits of dialogue.
It's a film that's very, very, very interested in its own history as a series.
Absolutely.
That's certainly with Skyfall, like the whole back end of Skyfall was going to his childhood home in Scotland, I think it was, and the reveal of the Aston Martin DB5, which was from earlier films and that kind of thing. You thought, God, this is like it's partly for the fans, but it's also really upset. It's got a feeling of self-importance to it that actually I find quite unattractive.
Yes, I that's a very good way of putting it. I agree.
It's not actually this film. So I wasn't really looking forward to this very much. I didn't dread it or anything. I just thought I'm not that crazy about Bond really, and I've always sort of resented the implication that I should be, which I felt a little bit. And like I said to you, I was chatting to Celia a couple of days ago, and she said, "Are you going to see the new Bond?" And I said, "Yeah." And she went, "I always thought you'd be interested in Bond." And I said, "Why?" Because I was expecting her to say something like, "Oh, it's because it's an English action movie and there's a kind of national identity thing going on with it." And what she said was, because it's got cars and girls and guns and gadgets. And I was like, oh, right, so what you're saying is I'm a straight guy. You know, like, it's not that specific to, like, that sort
of
stuff.
But I think that's...
But to me, like, saying, oh, you must be interested in Bond, to me, has always felt a little bit like being told I must be interested in cricket, you know?
Well, no, I mean, I think it's different because, you know, if you're interested in popular culture, you are really, it's about the popular, right? And I am interested in popular culture, and how could you ignore, you know, one of the most financially successful and socially influential series, you know, in the last 50 years? I mean, I do think that there is kind of, you know, something in that.
Right, but the point is to say that, well, everyone then is interested in it if it's that big and popular. So why is the implication that, well, I must be? Do you know what I mean? They always felt like, fine. Well, I must have some particular interest. And I never really felt that I did.
Well, I'm not that interested in gadgets or girls or cars and whatever. And I've always been interested in Bond.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, Bond offers other things as well.
So, I wasn't that crazy about this, and also I knew it was the best part of 3 hours long. And then it starts, and you get this scene with the young Léa Seydoux, and a vague and brief introduction to this villain, but it's very unusual, and I really liked it. And then you get the introduction to Bond.
Really like that.
You get the introduction to Bond, who's been retired for 5 years at this point. He breaks up with Léa Seydoux, and then it's 5 years later. But then, and you get this action scene, you get this development of the drama, thinking, wow, this is like, I'm really enjoying this.
Well, let me interject before you continue, because I really liked the opening scene. I really loved the title sequence, actually.
Well, this is what I was getting to. It's not that I didn't like the titles. You know, they kind of look pretty. But what I hated, what really, when we go, oh, fuck this, was it doesn't just say, you know, No Time to Die or whatever. It comes in with these, like, brown and yellow dots on screen which look and are designed to look very 60s 70s graphics, and it says Albert R. Broccoli presents Daniel Craig as James Bond in No Time to Die, and I thought, oh, fuck you. Do you know what I mean? That thing of the self-importance of it, the Albert R. Broccoli, it really turned me off. We
were focusing on completely different things, because I was focusing on the symbolism of it, you know, and the song and the image of Rule Britannia kind of sinking in the sand, you know, and I thought not only a sign of how times have changed and how Bond has changed, you know, but also I thought there was something cheap about it, yeah, that it was kind of too statement-y, yeah, because that is the image, right? It's Rule Britannia sinking.
I actually wasn't even looking at that.
You're missing the most important thing.
I wasn't even looking at that. I'll tell you what I was doing. I was listening to Billie Eilish yawn her way through the most dreary song. It was even, I mean, Skyfall's song was better than this, and that was just as yawny.
I liked it.
Ugh, dreary fucking shit. But then, you know, it did start to pick up for me again after that, which again I was surprised by, because I thought, oh, it's lost me.
I was glad that this is going to be the last Daniel Craig film, because, you know, the scenes in the car with Léa Seydoux, yeah, at the beginning, I thought, you know, he's old enough to be her grandfather. Like, you know, the age disparity, which wasn't evident to me, or I didn't notice it, in the last film. In this one, it really felt like, I
agree with you. Although I want to think about it, to look a little bit, because when you think about when he came out of the water, it was the first one we did, right? He came out of the water and he had those trunks on, and the big man boobs he had and everything. You know, he looked great.
He looked great, and he was already in his 40s or something. You know, he wasn't.
There's no shot like that here. There's no shot like that here.
Well, for good reason,
right? But actually, I even think, like, it's not that he's unattractive look or anything like that.
He's very attractive,
but there's a way that his clothes, apart from when he's in, like, the tuxedo maybe, where he really, you know, he looks the Bond part. When he's dressed in other stuff, he's just sort of like casual things on. The clothes seem to sort of hang off him a little bit. He looks kind of thin and worn and gaunt. I think it's part of what the character is really meant to be evoking now. Like, he's coming to the end of... He's been retired for 5 years, for one thing. You know, he's kind of... Physically, he's not quite Bond anymore. And then what you get is, oh, well, he is still Bond.
Well, I think also that's another thing which I think the films have deviated from. Because in the past, you know, how Bond looked, yeah, the clothes he wore and so on were very important to defining who he was, right? And who we thought of as Bond, yeah? It was the tux, right? Or if not the tux, some sharp suit or, yeah, kind of, you know, people watched Bond to have an idea of what to wear. Like, you know, even in the scenes like in, you know, in Dr. No, where it's all like polo shirts and slacks, right? Yeah, there's an attention to clothes. And this one, it seems very careless about. I mean, you know, there wasn't a single outfit that Daniel Craig wore that I thought, ooh, you know, must get that. Or,
no, but so, yeah, like I say, that is what they're trying to do with the character. They're trying to... I mean, I really did I liked where they went with the character, right? They made him retired and they gave him different reasons to be interested in that kind of thing. And then the idea of giving away his number in his retirement to another, you know, to another Bond.
That was also kind of cheap.
What do you mean cheap?
Well, you know, because they've given his name away. You always have the idea of like Cristiano Ronaldo's number 7 when watching this, actually. But of course, they kind of mitigated because the new 007 is like, you know, this beautiful, sharp black woman. And then kind of they use that as a kind of an anti-racist thing at the end with the villain in a way that I also thought was very cheap.
How do you mean?
Well, she says, I could use this to kill all your people in West Africa or whatever. And she just kicks him out and kicks him in the bridge and kills him. You know, which I thought was like a crowd-pleasing but really cheap, you know, kind of thing. And this is, so, you know, this is a Bond that isn't interested in clothes, that isn't interested in cocktails, and that actually isn't really interested in sex. No. It's the least sexy Bond. It's not playful about it. You know, so you could argue that, like, Bond was always, like, a bit of a misogynist and whatever, you know, and of course it's true, you know. But I thought what was appealing about Bond was that he was unapologetically interested in sex, yeah, in all its varieties, and, you know, kind of, you know, that's one of the things that I loved about it, whereas, like, yeah, sex as fun has no place in this movie.
No. And actually, the Bond girl in this is Ana de Armas, who
I thought was wonderful, by the way.
She's stunning, and she's very good, but she's in it for fucking 10 minutes. You know, like, the Bond girl sticks around, right? That's the point, right? She's the sidekick, and this, it does away with that. He doesn't fuck her.
Yeah.
He's, you know, she gets to kick ass in a couple of shots.
Which is wonderful.
Which I loved. Yeah, but 2 shots.
They're beautifully done, and she brings a boost of energy into the film. Actually, you know, it's almost like...
But don't you find her disappointment? Because she's not there for very long.
Well, it's this thing, if you don't see it as a Bond film, then it's not a disappointment, because, you know, yeah, it's... And I do think that there's an argument to be made that this has changed so much that it's not really a Bond film, because, you know, all those things that I'm talking about, you know, are very embedded into the DNA of what a Bond film is, right? Like, you know, this film has almost no humor. Yeah, you take away the humor, you take away the sex.
Oh no, I thought it was full of humor.
Did you?
Oh yeah, no, I laughed a lot. I mean, I think they're deliberate jokes. I wasn't just laughing at bad things. I laughed. It was good jokes.
I did laugh, but
the humor comes a little bit less from Daniel Craig than it otherwise would. Like I said, you know, Pierce Brosnan would laugh things off and always make a joke about something, and that's true probably of the other Bonds. Daniel Craig's Bond is less inclined to do that, and humor comes from other...
have a laugh in him, actually.
Humor comes from other situations. And other means, but it's a film that's full of laughs, even if the character isn't.
I don't think it's full of laughs. I think obviously it has a few, but I don't think that many, and it's certainly not a light-hearted film.
I think that's true. What do you make of the villain, Rami Malek?
I love him. Actually, you see, so I'm making it sound as if I didn't like the film, and I really did. Actually, I thought it had a better kind of supporting lineup than almost any other Bond film that I can see. So, you were talking about, the Bond girl, and then there's Léa Seydoux, and then there's the scientist, who I thought was wonderful, and then there's Christoph Waltz and Ralph Fiennes, and kind of every part is played by like a real, fantastic actor who's given a little bit to do, even if the role is very small. Yeah. So that was all wonderful. I love seeing Christoph Waltz again. He was brilliant, and he got some laughs. And I thought Rami Malek was wonderful. I thought, his face, his presence, he chose to do something like completely different because he was very still, very quiet, very stylized, very threatening, I thought. So I loved him.
What do you think of the construction of the character, not just the performance?
Oh, the characters are nothing.
I mean, I had a real problem with it, actually, because I was saying to you just before the film began, I was like, oh, they take him so seriously now. Why can't you just get back to someone who wants to blow up the world? And then you get this character who does want to blow up the world, and I wasn't into him. Because you get this whole thing about his relationship with the Léa Seydoux character. He's the one who kills her mum and then saves her at the start, and then comes back this years later. And the whole thing is that Léa Seydoux's dad, this Mr. White, who apparently has been in previous films, but I didn't fucking know and recognise him, but he's part of the serialisation of the Craig films. Her dad was working for Blofeld and killed Rami Malek's entire family, right? So Rami Malek holds a grudge. That's why he kills her mum at the start. And then ultimately he manages to use Léa Seydoux to kill Blofeld. And you're like, okay, so Blofeld's the guy he was after, right? He's got what he wanted. And then he just carries on being a nasty piece of work to people. And then he's also sort of poison ivy, because he has these plants that he can control people's minds with and shit like this. And he has a lair out in the middle of nowhere on this island, which is a very Bondy thing. And he's got the facial disfigurement and stuff. But you get this thing, there's this MacGuffin throughout the whole film, which is this thing called Heracles, which is a British sort of biological super weapon that means you can very selectively kill individuals based on their DNA, right? So he uses that to take out Spectre and take out Blofeld. And then he goes, well, I can just take out the whole world with this. And I'm like, I think it would be fun, and that's a great thing for Bond to try and stop. But where's the motivation for this character to do this? It's nonsensical.
It's true that he's not given a motivation. And usually, in a Bond film, the motivation would have been very simple, like money. Right. Money, or revenge, power. Or power. Yeah.
His motivation ultimately is revenge, but once the revenge has been executed, he's left with no more motivation, yet he carries on. That's the issue.
Yeah.
Right? And he talks about free will a bit, and you're like...
It didn't bother... I mean, those things didn't bother me at all. I mean, I think what bothered me was the self-important tone, the portentousness of it all, the self-mythologizing of the Bond series, and the darkness of look, and the fact that it wasn't playful.
I mean, I think it was probably a little more playful than you were thinking, and you do say you had a good time, so... So I suppose, despite all of that, then what were you enjoying?
Well, as I said, I mean, I enjoyed the action. I enjoyed, a lot of the set pieces. I enjoyed the actors very much. The story kept on moving. I thought, that's all. I mean, kind of, but I do think of Bond as being something else. Yeah.
Did it maintain your interest for its duration?
There was a moment where I looked at my watch where I thought it's just going on for too long.
Do you remember when abouts that was?
Near the end.
I definitely sort of started to drop off in the latter half of the film, and certainly when he's talking to Blofeld, I think it was, which is probably not that far into the film. That's maybe a halfway point thing. Like a conversation was going on between Bond and Blofeld, and I'm like, I haven't followed any of this. Yeah. I've just really dropped. Just completely.
For me, I think the moment was when he goes back to Léa Seydoux and discovers that she has a child that might be his. And I thought,
the action scene that follows that, where they're trying to take him out and they go through the woods, I thought was terrific.
Yeah.
And then maybe it's after that for me that I started to doze off a bit as well. And there's definitely stuff with Rami Malek's character where I'm going, I have no interest in this guy.
I thought he was riveting. I wasn't even... those concerns of yours didn't even cross my mind. I was just so interested in watching him.
But you just didn't think, why is he doing this?
Don't know.
How's he got the money?
I mean, it's a Bond film. You don't ask those questions.
I definitely, you've got to...
Where does he get the money? He's stolen it, you fool.
That's a great question to ask. You know, where's he getting the money? Where's he getting the power? Where's he come from? You get this thing about his family's been killed, but he's like nobody. So he's come up from somewhere. I want to know a little bit about that. You do get in the Bond films. You do get, this guy, he comes from here. You know, you get like the backstory, and it maybe in like some briefing, or in this case, it would probably come from Leo Seydoux. But there's not a lot of it. It's just, he's a really bad dude. I don't think that's enough. And the Bond villain is one of those things. You get the Bond card, the Bond gun, the Bond gadget, the Bond villain. Every film, the girl is not done justice, and the villain is really lacking.
I don't think the villain is lacking. I really loved him. Though, of course, he is split in two because, it's Christopher Waltz and...
there's a couple of villains. But he's the main one. Because he takes out both.
I think that's the problem with the film. There's a couple of villains. There's a wife versus Bond girl.
That's what these films have been doing.
There's two 007s.
Like in the Craig films, there has generally been, at least with the villains, there's been like the villain in this film, and then the underlying story, which is this like long story to do with Spectre and Blofeld and so on, that which you gradually learn about through the course of the films. Each one
I mean, I think there's a mismatch, because I think this is a film that is trying to be serious about things. Whereas actually kind of the whole point of the Bond films is that it's not serious, that it's playful. I mean, it could be communicating something serious about the world, but not by taking itself seriously, right? And actually, I don't even think it did that, Bond. I just think there's none of the gleefulness, of the playfulness, of the colorfulness, of the wit, of the, the lines, the gags. There's almost no visual gags either, which, I mean, mind you, I didn't like the visual gags much in the Roger Moore ones anyway. They were always like kind of a bit too stupid, campy. So I don't know. Anyway, I'm glad I saw it.
I'm glad I saw it, and it was better than I thought it would be. And for most of the film, I was having a really good time. Ultimately, I'm not someone who's massively invested in Bond, but you have to admit, certainly as an English person, that Bond is important. Like, Bond is one of our major cultural exports over the last 50, 60, 70 years. And he and the character and the style and everything that he communicates is kind of embedded in British culture and comes from British culture.
I used to tease my students about that because, and it's true, that when I saw the Bond films, both on television and in the cinema, beginning in the 70s in Canada, I never thought of them as British films at all.
Yeah.
They were too big budget and colourful, and they travelled all over the world, and it looked like an expensive it felt like an expensive American film, basically. Kind of going through international locations. I mean, that you have an M or an MI5 or whatever, that's the equivalent of, setting something else in a Jules Verne film, or Around the World in 80 Days, or whatever. You set it in London, but really, it could have been in Paris or Tokyo. Or, the British thing was never as important to me, let's say, as people my age who are British.
No, sure. But I mean, as a kind of cultural export, they're definitely communicating something about Britain and Britishness and something that we want. Something that we value about ourselves, right? And how we want the world to see us.
I think it would be very interesting to do kind of like a cross-cultural comparison about that, because even to say it's an export, I mean, it's a film that was entirely financed by either MGM or United Artists, right?
Okay.
So the money is American, etc., etc. So, I mean, don't get me wrong, I get it. It's MI5, there's a picture of the Queen, some of them are even set in former colonies. But that's not really quite what I'm talking about. I do get what you're talking about. Like, as a production, productions, it takes American money to do something like Bond. But I mean, as something about national identity and
like I say, the way we see ourselves and that kind of thing. Like Bond, we don't look at Bond the same way we look at like Fast and Furious, right? Fast and Furious is American culture,
Sure.
and Bond is British culture, or a version of British culture, and that's something that you grow up in this country having a relationship with, whether you like it or not.
Yes, I'm just saying that I never felt that way about it.
Yeah.
Now it could just be me, right? But I from what I remember, I mean, I don't remember the films being reviewed, in the light of their Britishness or as British cinema or anything like that. I mean, it was just, the latest Hollywood release.
Sure.
So now, I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I just think that there's an interesting difference culturally in how it's approached and it's perceived and it's valued and it's read.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because here, I think all the things that you say about are right from here.
Exactly. Yeah. But I've never had that feeling that I must go and watch all of these in order, which I think some people get. Bond. I don't know if it still is because I don't watch live TV much anymore. But certainly on live TV, Bond was always on like a Sunday afternoon. It was the thing on ITV. There'd be a Bond film.
Yes, I loved watching them.
And I always found it so easy to turn them off.
Oh, I love them.
And I don't think it was like a objection to Bond or churlishness or anything. I just thought it was not interesting.
Well, there's so many things we can talk about. I mean, I'm just remembering that Loyola Chapman has just written a book on Bond's clothes, on suits, and who made them and the influence that they had. And I mean, I haven't read the book yet, right? But it's a whole book on, Bond's suits. Right? You could imagine a similar thing being done on the cars or,
sure.
Kind of so many different things.
I'm sure they have been.
Yeah.
The cars are exclusively Aston Martin now. Like, they flirted with BMW in the 90s when obviously they were getting German money.
Yes.
Because they paid the most. And it's like, no. I remember the British press at the time. I was very young, but I definitely remember like outcry against the BMW 7 Series or whatever the fuck he was driving in one of those films. I thought, no, absolutely not. And now it's just like Aston Martin exclusively. It has to be, because that is the height of Britishness.
Yes. Well, I think there was also maybe a similar thing when it went from Savile Row to like Brioni suits or whatever, right? But anyway, this film has none of that.
It's got an Aston. It's got several.
No, I know, but
I know what you mean though. It's not showing off the way those other things. I think to be fair, I think it does show off the cars still.
No, I think even the car, you never get the sense of, ooh, look at this car, isn't it sleek and gorgeous, and look at the plush interior, and look how it drives. I mean, this is like, you have the car come in, and boom, bullets are being, kind of thrown. And
well,
the thing about that first car is not about the car, it's about what Q has done to the car to make it so, impregnable.
Well, and it's also about it being the history of Bond, because it's it's a DB5 from the old days, and it's like because that's the reason everyone always wanted to drive an Aston Martin, was because it was the Bond car from the old days, and that's one of the reasons that Aston Martin is the brand that it is. They are completely inseparable, so that's a big part of why that car remains so kind of integral to these films. And the future of Bond is likely to be, well, I assume it will be, because she's been introduced here, Lashana Lynch.
I don't think so.
No?
No.
They'll recast, or they'll find something else?
I think they'll find... hopefully they'll find some big star, or, someone with the potential to be a big star who'll do it. I think it would be great if it was a woman. I can't imagine that this is the woman. I think it would be great if it would be like a person of colour, You
just don't think she in particular has what it takes?
No. I wouldn't bet 200 million on this actress, even if she was very good. But I don't think she has the charisma, to...
No, I think you're right about that. She has one kind of Bond line where she kills the scientist, and she says, do you know what time it is? And he goes, no. She goes, time to die. He you need to work on your lines. That is not a funny line. Bond has better lines than this.
No. It'll be a measure to how responsive, the producers are to see what they do, with it next. I mean, because, that image of Britannia sinking in the sand, right? And also this suggestion in the film, that we live in a different world, that the government is corrupt, and that my government now isn't talking to your government, and so there is like a whole sense of, the world is also not what it was. Obviously, the Cold War's over, but the U.S. is no longer a place of integrity, and neither is Britain a place of honor. So all of the way that business used to be communicated, at least to the audience, is altered. So I wonder, how that's going to play out in the future, if at all. Kind of, what assumptions of a world order and modes of behaving. Who are the good guys? Yeah, because
it's true, and Ralph Fiennes' M kind of crystallizes a lot of that.
Yeah,
and his is an interesting character. He's quite reactive and likes to keep his secrets, but he is a spy. But you think about the previous M's, it was Queen and Country and all of this, and I suppose Ralph Fiennes does have that, but he's someone who's kind of out of control somehow.
Yes, I mean, I think basically the world is so altered. Because one of the things that you have now is rogue corporations who are beyond the boundaries of nation states, right? So, but if you have the narrative being about competing corporate powers, then where do moral or ethical questions come in? Yeah. Who's right? What are you fighting for? And you can't just be fighting for my corporation making the money, right? So now, to have like a government vis-a-vis corporate power, that might make an interesting kind of thing. Though perhaps it's already been done many times. Yeah.
Bond taking down Facebook.
Yes.
And disinformation and all of that.
I don't know, but. You just think that nation states warring against each other, or even blocks warring against each other, is not a contemporary framework for understanding, actions. Yeah.
No, absolutely. Although I suppose, the thing is that Bond villain has always been an individual acting.
Yeah, and also Bond villains have always had that corporate element. Yeah, it's an individual acting. It used to be for the Russians, say, but actually the villain was always a bit roguish in relation to it really was selfishly motivated to have more power and more money. So that corporate element, was always there, but as was a clear delineation of what was right, which was like an Anglo-American way of doing things in the service of democracy and the people.
That's what is under question.
Yeah.
These days.
So,
yeah.
Anyway, we should wrap up. So, and final thoughts?
Well, I recommend that people see it. I had a really good time.
Yes.
And I suppose, in a sense, I'm glad that it's wrapping up. I have liked how these last few films have been serialised, to return to that. And I think it's worked. But I also miss when each film just stood on its own and you could just dip into a James Bond film. This one, he's taking down the news corporation. This one, it's the oil pipeline. And nothing had any relationship to anything else.
I think one of the things we haven't talked about, and I don't want to talk about it, but I just want to at least mention it, is a contrast to the Mission Impossible films. Because the Mission Impossible films are really old-fashioned, right? In the sense that they have their formula, they have their mission. Yeah, the mission is clearly delineated, right? And then they go resolve it. Yeah, kind of when you go to Vienna, you admire Vienna. When you see the opera house, what a beautiful opera house of this action thing. Yeah, so actually it's interesting that a more modern iteration of something quite similar, because I think Mission Impossible was actually designed in relation to Bond. Yeah, it was a way of.
But it came after it, right?
It came after it, but it was a way of having an American, a view of it, right? It's about a mission. You go accomplish it. Yeah. So I think it's interesting that I find the Mission Impossible films so much more exciting than these Bonds. And it's interesting that they are ones who stick much more closely to the formula.
You kind of feel
find more imaginative, ways of fulfilling that formula. Yeah?
I think there's arguably more pressure on Bond. Certainly in the press and the kind of cultural consciousness, there's pressure on Bond and what's he going to do next. There's been all this talk about, is the next Bond going to be black? Is the next Bond going to be female? And that's very, very important. Whereas the next Ethan Hunt, whoever that might be, in Mission Impossible, that's not a question anyone's asked,
But next Ethan Hunt. You're kidding.
But you know what I mean? Like, you never think of that as a question in something else, whereas it's very important here. And like I say, the thing about, they had a BMW in 1995. No.
Yes.
So there's definitely pressure on Bond to do those things, and maybe that's why it's... Well, I don't know. I don't have an end to that sentence.
Yes. And I think it's good that you don't have an end to that sentence because, I'm only guessing, and I'm not, again, minimizing, the importance of the film's Britishness. But I do think you have to keep things in proportion, right? Because, people here are not invested in the Mission Impossible films because the Mission Impossible films are American, right? On the other hand, the market for the Bond films in Britain is only so much. I'm not saying it's not much. I'm sure it's very considerable. I'm sure it's a lot more than is proportional to the population. Yes, but if you're thinking of like a global market and, how much the Bond films make in, America and, Germany and, Japan or whatever. Yeah, so I think this is almost like a self-investment in a myth.
Yeah.
So sure. It's not necessarily made for you, and it's not necessarily made by you, which is why, again, this investment in it becomes so fascinating, really.
Yeah. No, it fucking matters to people here.
It does.
But in the big picture.
And yet, the money's not British. The distribution networks aren't British. The director isn't British. I don't know about the writers.
I think the main two writers who've been doing it for the last 7 films, I think they're British. Phoebe Waller-Bridge also worked on this. And the other writer was a director who's American.
So, anyway, that's an interesting twist to think about. But all of that said, I also liked it very much, and I recommend.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah. So we spent an hour dissing it, for various reasons. But I think if you don't go in with too set expectations of what a Bond film is, you might enjoy it more.
Yeah, that's probably a fair way to think about it. And don't go in expecting greatness, because that's just a guide for everything. Just have low expectations and you can only be pleasantly surprised.
All right. On that note, thank you very much for listening. We are eavesdropping at the movies, and we are on
Apple Podcasts, Audible, Google Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud and YouTube. On social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter at Eavesdrop Movies. And the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.